Cocytus is designed to deal both high burst damage and high sustained damage. Not only does he have powerful skills like the Wisdom King strikes, but he also has 4 limbs that can each be equipped with one of the 20 weapons in his arsenal. Not to mention that he can also cast a number of frost-based attacks and disabling abilities that further strengthen his close quarter combat capabilities. These all stemming from his job class levels. But despite the fact that he has over 70 of them, we really only know 20. There's 10 in Kensei, 5 in Asuda, and 5 more in Knight of Niflheim, each providing a unique aspect that makes Cocytus more powerful. So let's take a look at exactly what those are and finish off this character profile by examining the rest of his build, abilities, and equipment. Then, by the end, hopefully you'll finally have an answer to the title question of how strong is Cocytus. But first, I'm sure you're all familiar with today's sponsor, the highly popular free-to-play mobile turn-based RPG, Raid Shadow Legends. Currently ranked top 3 out of all RPGs in the Google Play Store, with it garnering almost 15 million downloads in the last 6 months. Probably because it provides so many different ways to play, including a fully voiced story campaign, a highly competitive ranked PvP arena, and over 1 million ways to build your team of champions from 16 different factions, with over 14 new champions being added every month and plenty of progression missions and rewards that help you to unlock them. Not to mention that they've got an entire roadmap containing huge plans that show how they're going to continuously update the game with cool new features over the next 6 months, which I personally find always gives me something new to do and to look forward to. So if you're interested, then go ahead to the video description, click on the special links, and you'll get 50,000 silver and a free epic champion as part of the new player program to start your journey. Now, let's get back to the video. Starting with the first job class of Kensei, translating directly to Sword Saint. It is an ancient Japanese honorary title bestowed upon Japanese swordmasters who possess truly legendary and incomparable skill. So legendary, in fact, that it implied that only one person could have the title at any one time. The word saint is used in the translation to imply that the skill of the swordsman transcends that of the material world. One of the most famous Kensei in Japanese history you may recognize from Fate Grand Order as Miyamoto Musashi, a well-known warrior from the Sengoku period who wielded a sword in each hand and had an undefeated dueling record of 61 straight victories. Drawing from this, a sword saint in the context of Overlord is likely an uncommon job class, as in one that maxes out at 10 levels and is only available to those with specific kinds of classes, which at this point seems to be fighter-type classes. As for the abilities a sword saint may have, well, it's probably the source of many, if not all, his Buddhist-themed sword abilities, especially since the bulk of them have religious connotations and seem quite magical in the sense that they make his swordsmanship seem so powerful that it borders on the divine. So what exactly are these Buddhism-related sword skills? Well, first is Akalanata, or in Japanese, Fudo Myogeki, meaning a movable Wisdom King strike. A move created through a combination of 2 skills called Fudo's Binding and Kurikara Ken, the Divine Dragon Sword. Fudo's Binding would first summon a ghostly apparition of the immovable Wisdom King, which would work to debuff the target's evasion. This was followed up by Kurikara Ken, which was an attack that required the user to stand still and to power up before they would soon unleash a devastating blow. Now, using the 2 sequentially was the combination technique known as the immovable Wisdom King strike. There were actually 5 of these, 1 for each of the Wisdom Kings, though the immovable strike did the most damage. And given that it is a Buddhist-themed attack, it makes sense that the strength of the evasion debuff and the damage dealt scaled proportionally with the lower the opponent's karma rating, meaning beings like Ainz or Demiurge would be affected the most. Anyway, each of the 3 names all reference the same being. In Japanese Buddhism, Fudo-myo is one of the Wisdom Kings, often depicted wielding a sword to slice through ignorance and a lasso to bind demons. Akalanata refers to the ancient Mahayana deity known as the Immovable Protector, one that was adopted into Indian Buddhism as the Wisdom King Akala. Finally, the Kurikara sword references the Dragon King Kurikara Fudo, which is just another personification of the Wisdom King Fudo. In this form, he is depicted as a dragon wrapped around a large divine sword. According to legend, Fudo had to fight the representative of a different religion, and so changed himself into a giant flaming sword in order to swing himself at his opponent. When the opponent did the same, the 2 became locked in a stalemate. So Fudo transformed into the Dragon King, then wound himself around the sword and slowly devoured it, granting him what we now know as the Sword of Wisdom. And it's with this sword that Fudo cuts away the 3 poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. That's why when Cocytus uses this skill, his battlecry is "Destroy the 3 poisons, Kurikara Sword." However, that single immovable Wisdom King strike isn't the end-all be-all for his attacks. It's actually the first hit in a multi-part combo called the Bright King combo. This entails performing each of the Wisdom King strikes in quick succession, and it's a move where the 5 Wisdom Kings would be summoned and each would strike the opponent with a special attack. When all 5 are summoned, they will then form a circle around the opponent and stretch their hands forward, restraining any opponent whose karma value is negative, opening up a window for the user to freely perform another attack of their choice. So, this combination technique was naturally quite powerful, as it could potentially penetrate the immunities that one would typically expect raid bosses to have. As such, it could only be performed once a day. This was the favorite combo of warrior Takemikazuchi. He would regularly use it in raids in conjunction with other techniques from other party members. For one, he would have them use their ability to set their opponent's karma rating far past the normal lowest values of -500 and change it all the way to -1000. This in turn would maximize the damage and debuffs received by the combo. Because it was such a strong attack that fit his build so well, Takemikazuchi made sure his creation could perform at least the first part of it. But it's also implied that Cocytus can perform more than one Wisdom King strike, so it's not unreasonable to assume that Cocytus can perform the entire Bright King combo himself. Moving on, Cocytus has 5 levels in Asuda. Asuda are a class of divine beings in Hinduism. In the earliest writings, it was a general term for spiritual entities that could have good or bad qualities. But later on, the Asuda became known as evil, malevolent, or power-seeking deities, which was in contrast to the Sura, who were considered the noble or good deities. A notable relatable aspect of both types of deities is that many of them are depicted as possessing multiple arms. In light of this, Japan and Japanese video games sometimes use the term Asuda to refer to beings with more than one pair of arms. So naturally, the Asuda class would be for those who want to create a character who can fight with just that, many arms. Cocytus in particular has 21 weapons at his disposal, and his build allows him to wield one weapon in each hand, making for a total of 4 at once, or up to 5 if you also assume that he uses his tail in battle. Now, given that Asuda is one of the more rare job classes, it likely had a large selection of hidden requirements in order to be unlocked. It's also pretty safe to assume that it's not what grants Cocytus his multiple arms, since appearance-changing classes are mostly attributed to the racial tree, not the job tree. Taking that into account, my guess would be that Asuda is a class only available to heteromorphic races that possessed multiple sets of arms. So once a character had this attribute, and other requirements like dual-wielding combat skills were met, the Asuda class would then be unlocked and give the user the ability to fight with more than 2 weapons at a time. I mean, quad wielding is certainly an extremely powerful ability that would massively increase your DPS, so it makes sense for it to be locked behind numerous obscure requirements. Aside from this though, there is one other ability possessed by Cocytus that could have been provided by the Asuda class, and that's Razor Edge Rasetsu. Rasetsu refers to the Rakshasa, a race of ferocious man-eating demons in Hindu mythology. Rakshasa, like much of Hinduism, would end up incorporated into Indian Buddhist mythology, which would then later be adopted into Japanese Buddhism. The Japanese pronounced Rakshasa as Rasetsu, leading to the name Razor Edge Rasetsu. In Japanese fantasy and shonen fiction, the word Rasetsu is often used as a cool-sounding name to imply something dark, sinister, mysterious, or dangerous, and has since lost much of its connection to Buddhism. Now, as an ability, its function is unknown, but it appears to be a self-buff skill. The Razor Edge portion of the name hints at some kind of power-up, and it's known to be used while Cocytus is casting cold and wind spells, presumably in order to improve them some way. Speaking of cold magic, let's now move on to Night of Niflheim. Niflheim, or World of Fog, is one of the 9 worlds of Norse mythology, and it's the homeland of primordial darkness, cold, mist, or ice. While initially uninhabited, Odin would end up appointing Loki's daughter Hel as the ruler of the region of Niflheim called, well, Hel. It's from this that the word Hell became associated with the underworld, the place for the souls of those who did not die glorious deaths in battle and therefore couldn't enter Valhalla. There's very clearly some interesting parallels between Cocytus' namesake and this Niflheim class, especially since both words relate to an icy cold underworld. However, Norse mythology doesn't have any mention of a group of knights in service to Hel in Niflheim, at least from what we could find anyway, unless the name itself is more of a reference to the warriors who didn't die a hero's death. If so, that would be a rather ironic title for Cocytus, especially given his overall design theme. So this leads me to believe that the primary connection here is just the cold environment of Niflheim itself. As implemented in the game of Yggdrasil, a Knight of Niflheim would probably be quite proficient both in the cold and with the cold. They could potentially fight or buff themselves with ice spells, have protection from ice damage, survive icy weather, use the temperature to afflict their enemies with debuffs, block attacks with barriers of ice, and I'm sure more of that sort of thing. The name itself also implies it would generally entail close range abilities, as the class was most likely intended for warriors who wanted to supplement their close range fighting abilities with ice magic. We do in fact know of one such ability possessed by Cocytus that is directly granted by Knight of Niflheim. It's the passive ability called Frost Aura. This makes his surroundings extremely cold, dealing continuous ice damage and slowing nearby creatures. At full power, it could reach a distance of well beyond 30 meters. Naturally, for a close combat warrior, an area of effect slow aura is a pretty useful ability. Of course, in the new world, extreme cold damage wouldn't just subtract a number off the opponent's HP bar. It could go so far as to outright freeze nearby creatures, or at least give them severe frostbite as demonstrated against lizardmen. As we saw, only the tribal chiefs who were a relatively high level survived the attack. Cocytus himself is actually immune to the cold. As we mentioned before, whether this was a special ability that warrior Takamikazuchi added to his exoskeleton, or just a special passive from a class like Knight of Niflheim is unknown. But this would no doubt ensure that Cocytus himself would not be affected by the aura, assuming that it didn't already avoid friendly fire. I mean, this is a genuine concern in the new world. Unlike Yggdrasil, friendly fire was enabled, so it's fully possible that your own abilities could damage yourself, and even your own allies. Fortunately, most of the servants of Nazarick, including all of the undead, were immune. But even if they weren't, Cocytus does have limited control over the effects and range of the aura. He normally has it virtually shut off, having it only affect a small area around him with a cold chill. Anyway, Frost Aura is the only confirmed ability associated with Knight of Niflheim, but he does have a number of other powerful cold spells that could come from it as well. Piercing Icicle launches a shotgun blast of icicles the size of one's arm to rain down on the opponent. This offensive spell would be effective against groups at close range, or it could be used to deal a powerful blow to a single target. The name itself also implies some kind of armor-penetrating quality. Second is Ice Pillars. This was also used against the Lizardmen to produce these giant ice pillars that would act as a goal line. Cocytus basically told the Lizardmen that if they crossed the threshold that these pillars marked, then they would die. Its actual purpose though is unknown, but I'm sure it could be used to entomb enemies in ice or even block weak ranged attacks. Another ability that Cocytus is mentioned to have is Cold Breath. Though in name only, perhaps it entails Cocytus firing a blast of cold air in a cone-shaped area of effect from his mouth. Then finally, the last known spell, and one of his most powerful, is Frostburn Smite. This projects a blast of icy cold wind over a short distance to freeze opponents in place and deal considerable damage. If it succeeds, the frozen enemies can be easily shattered into pieces with a follow-up blow. In this respect, the ability may function similarly to an instant kill spell like Ainz's Grasp Heart. Enemies not outright immune to the effect who also fail to resist the spell would effectively be killed instantly or at least removed from battle. Which brings us to the end of everything about his job classes and abilities. But what about his weapons and armaments now? Well, Cocytus's usual weapon is the Decapitation Fang, a large silvery blue halberd that he is normally seen holding in the anime, as well as his favorite weapon to use in regular combat. Little is known about this weapon, though the name Decapitation Fang may be a reference to the special weapon property in Dungeons & Dragons called Vorpal, which has a 5% chance of instantly killing your opponent via decapitation on a successful hit. But then again, it could just be a cool sounding name. Halberds were typically used as a combination of a poleaxe and a spear. The leverage provided by wielding it in two hands to make a large chopping motion would cleave through shields and armor, while the spear tip could keep opponents at bay from a distance. It gave the user the ability to engage from beyond the reach of a regular one-handed weapon, but since it required two hands, the wielder couldn't use a shield. That said, Cocytus as a level 100 NPC undoubtedly has the strength to effortlessly cleave through any creature in the new world even while wielding Decapitation Fang with only one hand. If he were, for instance, in a sparring match with a level 100 NPC, especially a close combat specialist with high defenses like Albedo or Sebas, he would most likely have to use it two-handed in order to penetrate their defenses with overwhelming force. Then, with his two other arms, he could wield two other blades or one other two-handed weapon at the same time. It really all came down to the type of situation that he was in, and some of his repertoire were no doubt large weapons like the Decapitation Fang, ones that were intended for use against durable melee frontliners and tanks, while others were known to be thin, fast katana-like weapons that could be swung more rapidly and quickly decimate more lightly armored opponents. We got to see one of these katana-like weapons in action while fighting the Lizardmen. Cocytus had pulled out what's called the Royal Godslayer Blade, a tachi, which is the Japanese equivalent of a longsword, measuring over 180 centimeters in length. naturally a sword that's 1.8 meters long would be far too massive for a typical human. But given that we're talking about Cocytus, who's 2.5 meters tall, it's actually the perfect size. Of all the weapons that Cocytus owned, this one was the sharpest, and it was the one that Cocytus revered the most. You see, Takemikazuchi had left it to him, presumably after acquiring better gear. So because it was a valued possession from his creator, Cocytus would only draw it for an opponent whose warrior spirit he respected. Now, aside from these, we don't know too much else about his other equipment. We do, however, know that after the Shaltir incident, he was given one of two world items, either Hygeia's Chalice or Billion Blades, both of which have unknown abilities. Though, if I had to guess, I'd say Billion Blades was the one given to Cocytus since it sounds like something straight out of Fate's Day Night. You know, something similar to the Gate of Babylon or Unlimited Blade Works. So perhaps it gives the user the ability to create large quantities of weapons or maybe even switch them out instantly on the fly. That could have been how he was able to draw the Royal Godslayer blade out of what seemed to be thin air. If that was the case, then it would definitely be a useful tool for Cocytus and his collection of over 20 weapons. So now that we know everything there is to know about Cocytus's abilities and gear, let's quickly recap everything that I've mentioned over the past 4 videos and finally start to answer the question of how strong he is. As I said in the beginning, ultimately Cocytus's build is designed to have both high burst damage and high sustained damage. Not only does he have powerful warrior skills that can push out a very high amount of damage in a short period of time, he also has 4 limbs that can each be equipped with powerful legendary class gear that can attack simultaneously. It's this balanced damage mix that makes him fairly effective against many different builds. When against a tank, his high sustained damage can rapidly wear them down, and when against glass cannons, his burst damage can quickly kill them with a few powerful skills before they can deal any significant damage. He also has a number of cold-themed attacks and disabling abilities that can be used against opponents at close range. So, knowing all of this, his 2 main weaknesses then would be ranged opponents and burst damage. I mean, his defensive capabilities are just not that high, and he doesn't seem to have any powerful defensive skills. So, if he does take a big hit, then he'll end up losing a lot of HP. Yeah, sure, he has his natural armor exoskeleton, which is designed to give him a decent amount of survivability, but that's just not powerful enough to really protect him for a long time from opponents with high damage. On top of that, due to the limited range of most of his offensive skills, he has to get within about 30 meters of an opponent to really do anything to them. A build like Shaltir's could easily kite Cocytus with a combination of her ranged spells and flight ability. However, the upside to his build is that if he can make it close enough to an opponent, then he will almost always destroy anything that isn't a close combat specialist like him. Pretty much, he is, to put it as simply as possible, a regular old melee DPS build that you can find in almost any MMO. So then, how powerful is he? Well, compared to the other Guardians, we already have a pretty good idea. As we've discussed before, there exists a rock-paper-scissors relationship between Albedo, Sibas, and Cocytus. Now, that's not to say that there's a particularly massive difference between the 3 of them. It's just that each of them have a slight edge over the other. As you might expect, Cocytus's physical attack is the highest of the 3, while his physical and magical defenses are at the lowest. However, he has just as much HP and better resistances than Sibas, meaning he's less likely to be affected by debuffs and disables. Then he also has more agility than Albedo, meaning he's more likely to dodge attacks. On top of that, he has the 2nd highest magical attack, which reflects his investment in magic caster classes. All things considered though, these are all just minor differences in their base stats. The more drastic difference stems from the nature of their active skills and abilities. While all 3 have a mix of offensive and defensive skills, Cocytus's samurai-style classes have lots more damage and attack spells, while Albedo's Dark Knight-style classes focuses more on defensive skills and even healing or debuff spells. Then Sibas's monk-style classes offer a balanced mix of offense, defense, and utility. And of course we can't forget about his dragon transformation. Using this knowledge, we can tell that Cocytus has the best offense and can beat Albedo. Albedo is the most durable and can beat Sibas, while Sibas is the most well-balanced and can beat Cocytus. Reason being that Cocytus has more sustained high-powered offensive skills that can overpower Albedo's defenses, whereas Albedo herself doesn't have any particularly powerful attacks that could kill Cocytus quickly. It would turn into this battle of attrition in which Cocytus would end up on top. Similarly, Albedo can beat Sibas because she can outlast him and his dragon transformation with her many defensive skills, abilities, and armor. Then without his transformation, he doesn't have enough attack power to threaten Albedo very much, if at all. Don't get me wrong though, Sibas's dragon transformation can push out a lot of damage in a very short window, which is why he can crush Cocytus's low defense before Cocytus would really have time to do anything. Now, what about the other floor guardians? Well, Shelter should be able to beat Cocytus thanks to her specialized 1v1 build, and Mare is the king of wide area offensive magic and could easily nuke him or any other floor guardian for that matter with his powerful AoE nature magic. Demiurge could harass Cocytus from a distance with his summons and skills, but I suspect they would lack the offensive punch to really bring Cocytus down quickly. He would be forced to extend the fight as he would have to slowly whittle Cocytus down, which honestly fits quite well with his style of fighting anyway. Finally, how powerful is he compared to the New World denizens? Well, as with all level 100 NPCs, it isn't even a contest. He's basically outright immune to anything in the New World that isn't around the same power level as a centuries-old Dragonlord or an awakened Godkin. This mostly in part to his immunity to both attacks and spells from any creature below around level 60. But overall, that's how strong Cocytus is. The only reason the Lizardmen lasted as long as they did was because Cocytus wanted to give them a somewhat noble death. He even let the two Shasha brothers take their absolute best shots against him. Now, if this same battle was against Adventurers or the Theocracy Black Scripture, then it would have been over much quicker. I'm sure you can't imagine Cocytus giving those types of enemies enough respect to have the opportunity to fight back. They definitely would have just been one shot. Anyway, that's it for the main floor guardians. It's been a long time coming, but we finally did it. Of course, the Overlord videos aren't going to stop here. Jin4 and I definitely have other plans in the works. Just make sure that you stick around the channel so that you can see it when it comes out. Now, before I go, I'd like to thank Raid Shadow Legends once again for sponsoring this video. Don't forget, you can use the link in the description to start playing for free today. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!